Welcome to the Macro Express Advanced Installation. An advanced installation is a way to answer all the basic installation questions without needing to prompt you or the user for answers. First, let's go ahead and create a file that can answer all these questions for us. I like to call it a key file. So let's go into My Computer, C Drive. Also, keep in mind this file can be located anywhere. We're going to make a new text file, however, and call it Your Choices. yourchoices.txt. Let's go ahead and open this. Most of these commands will be answered by a Y or an N for no or yes. The options may be upper, lower, or mixed case. There can be no spaces, however, in the equal sign or the answer. Let's go ahead and start with our first option, no editor. And keep in mind these can be upper or lower case, equals, and then I'm going to specify no or N or Y for yes. So if I don't want an editor installed, I'm going to specify Y. If I do want the editor installed, I'm going to specify N for no. Let's go ahead and go to our next line. If we specify on the answer no help equals yes, this means the help documents will not be installed by default. If we specify N, it means that it will be installed by default. Let's go ahead and go to the next line. The third option is no quick start. Now if we don't specify an answer for one of these commands or we leave it out altogether, the system will interpret that and just leave it at the default setting. So in other words, if we leave no editor out, the default is to install the editor, so it will install the editor. Let's go ahead and specify no here, or N, so that it does install the quick start. Go to our next line. Macro Express comes with over 200 icons for use for menus when you're creating macros. I recommend installing them if you're a developer or if you've used icons for your projects and they are one of the default icons that comes with Macro Express. So go ahead and specify N there and go to our next line. Our next option is install path equals, and then where we would like to install Macro Express. So for example, if I specify C://macro express, this will install Macro Express directly on my root drive. Whereas if I specify nothing, so remove all that and I just have the install path equals nothing, or if I just remove install path altogether, it will install to the default location, which is C drive program files Macro Express 3. One other note about install path is if you do specify a path, say Macro Express, the trailing slash will be ignored. Let's go ahead and go to the next line. Our next option is Start Menu Folder, and it is abbreviated. This would be very helpful if you need to install the shortcuts of Macro Express that originally install to a different location than Macro Express under your Start Programs directory. So let's go ahead and specify like equals utilities. Now, instead of installing under Macro Express, it's going to install under Start Programs, and then it'll create a new folder called Utilities. Our next option, if we go to a new line, is Startup. This means that Macro Express will automatically start up by default when Windows starts. If we specify yes, then it will start. If we specify N, then it won't start. So let's go ahead and specify Y and go to our next line. The next option is Launch Now, and this will allow the program to launch immediately after the installation starts. So if we specify Y, this means that it will launch immediately. If we specify N, it will have the opposite effect. Let's go ahead and go to the next line. We have 4 different options on the next choice, Quick Start Now, equals. The choices are Y, N, P, and NP. First, Y for yes. And if you have installed the Quick Start guide using the no quick start equals N, which we did, our third option is P, which stands for prevent. It allows the Quick Start guide to be shown at the end of the installation and keeps it from being displayed when Macro Express Editor launches. In other words, the P option is no different from the yes option, which is the default choice. Finally, the NP option gives the same results as saying just N or no. If we do decide to use the next option, which is reboot, and we set it to no, which means that it will reboot the system after the installation is complete, the quick start guide will not be displayed because your system will be rebooting while it is trying to display it. I think we do want to, however, set this to Y so that it does not reboot the system. It is a good idea to reboot it, but we probably won't want to do it right after we finish the installation. Let's go ahead and go to the next line. Our next option is license name. And this does need to be set to the exact same information that we registered our product with. This includes spaces and capitals. So for example, if I registered this to the 123 company, and that's how I registered it, I would need to make sure I type this in exactly the same way. Let's go ahead and go to our next line. Well, we got our name in there, but what about using a license code? Well, let's go ahead and specify license code equals, and then we're going to specify our code. I went ahead and copied and pasted an example license code in. It should look similar to this, but it will not look exactly like this. Let's go ahead and go to our next line. And capitals, once again, does not matter as far as the command option or the information you're providing, besides the license name. As for our next option, config file path, we need to first export a program configuration. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to minimize everything so I can see my desktop. And I need to go into Start, Programs, and then if we go under Macro Express and Macro Express 3, it'll then launch the application. Depending on which settings you used when you originally installed Macro Express, it will display the start screen or show the Explorer or Editor in full Explorer view. That being said, how do we go ahead and configure our application how we want it and export that file so we can later use that same configuration again? First, let's go to Options, then Preferences. Here we can modify quite a few different settings. We can modify icons, backup functions, caching, capture rates, all sorts of different things. I'm going to go ahead and change a couple of configuration options here. First, let's go under the backup option. Let's say we want it to back up every 3 days, and we want it to prompt the user before backing the file up. And it's gonna wait 10 seconds before selecting yes automatically. This will auto start when Windows shuts down, or we can click off this so it doesn't do that. We can also specify a backup folder, so if we want a folder that's different than the original macro file location, we can specify that here. And also how many files it keeps. So if we want to say keep backing up the file but only store 5 of those backup files, we would leave that number at 5. Let's go ahead and go through a couple more options here just to give you an idea of the different settings it can change, and also so we can store those files in the configuration. The next option I would check would be under Network, and it's file locking of macro files. What this allows you to do is for networks, if one user is editing the macro, another user can't edit that same macro. They can still run the macro, but they can't edit it. And the reason why this is important is because if you're editing the macro at the same time, it could create a read error and make the macro file go corrupt. I definitely make sure you do make backups of your macros frequently, as sometimes they do go corrupt, especially with network files. We can even store passwords, so it prevents Macro Express Editor from loading, or passwords on run files. We can also get down to adding a password to each individual macro file, and we'll get into that in a later video. We can set scheduling times, short keys to run the files if you want it to like match the uppercase or the upper lowercase. And also on the startup, we can have it so it displays a splash screen, which I don't care for. I like to keep that off. And also the start editor on startup of Macro Express. If you want this to start, I recommend doing it minimized so that it doesn't bother you each time you try to run a macro file. These are just a few options. We'll get more into detail in a later video on how to use these. Let's go ahead and select OK for right now. And now we need to export these options. So go under Tools, Export Program Configuration. Now it's going to ask us where we want to save this file. I'm going to select the Save in directory and move to my C drive just to keep it on the same location as my key file that contains all my configuration options. This one I can also name Your Choices, and I'm going to name it Your Choices Configuration. Now if you notice, I don't need to type in a .txt extension. It will automatically save as a .mcf file, which stands for macro config files or macro configuration files. Go ahead and press Save, and we're going to close out our edit or our Explorer here. It actually doesn't close it out, it minimizes it to the system bar. If we double click back here again or single click, it'll bring the Explorer right back up into view. I'm going to minimize this or close this again. If I minimize it, it goes down to my taskbar instead of closing it out of the taskbar, and so it's only running over in my system bar. Let's go ahead and go back into my file called yourchoices.txt. From here we need to specify that config file path. So this is going to include that extension .mcf. So I know I saved it on my C drive, and then I know I named it. Let's go back into my C drive just so I can make sure I get the correct name. I'm going to click this as I was renaming it, but I'm simply going to right click and hit copy, so I copy the name out of it, and then I'm going to paste it in my notepad file. The reason I did this is just in case I made any errors in spelling or something similar to that. It would be the exact same so it doesn't goof up and it cannot locate the file. Let's go ahead and go to our next line. Our last option is macro file DEST for macro file destination. I'm not going to cover this in much depth in these videos, so please view that in the book, as it will give you more in-depth information on how to use this option. One last thing I want to point out, we can actually view this .mcf file, and we're going to do that right now. Let's go ahead and close out of yourchoices.txt. Might ask you to save it. Go ahead and hit yes if it does. It's also a good idea to save your work as you're going, as in case your computer turns off or the power goes out, any number of things. Let's go ahead and right click on our file, the .mcf file, your choices configuration, and we're going to click open. You should see a dialog similar to this depending on which operating system you're using. I'm going to select the program that I want to open this file from a list. Go ahead and click OK. So I'm going to give me some different options here. I want to go ahead and open this with Notepad and press OK. In essence, this gives us a basic breakdown of everything that the MCF file is going to add to the registry. So this is pretty much the same copy as what's in your current registry editor if you look under the Macro Express location. Okay, let's go ahead and close this out, and let's close out our C drive. Last but not least, how do we get Macro Express 3, the setup file, to read that key file that is on my C drive or anywhere it's located? Well, let's go ahead and create a shortcut first from our exe file. Let me explain why we did that. There's two different options that we can pass variables into Macro Express 3 when we're starting up. the installation. First, we can go to Start Run and type in CMD, and this works with Windows 2000 and Windows XP. The other option is by going to Start, Programs, Accessories, Command Prompt, and this would be for users of 95, 98, Millennium, 2000, or XP. We're not going to use this option because it requires a bit more work than just creating a shortcut and passing the variables through the shortcut. So let's go ahead and right-click on the shortcut file and go to Properties. Okay, in our target path, if we go to the end and we specify /m, lowercase or uppercase, doesn't really matter, and we set that equal to our key file, or also known as the installation file, and we specify where that file is located. So C drive, and then your choices.txt. So what this is telling it to do is pull all the information from this file. It's still not going to install the program silently, but it will have all our options installed when we originally install Macro Express. Let's go a step further. Let's add a /s to the end of that. That means that the installation will install silently without asking the user or myself any questions during the installation. One other quick note is if you do use the /m and the /s, you must have the /s before the /m. Let's go ahead and turn off silent mode for a minute so that we can test our script out. I'm going to hit apply and OK and start up our shortcut. If we follow this through, I'm going to go to where I did modify one of the settings. All this stuff is default. The destination path is not changed, and there's a reason why. You might be wondering, well, why are you showing me this? Because it's a common error. So it's good to take a look at it just to make sure that we do get it fixed. On my computer, the extensions are hidden. So if we view this file, it says yourchoices.txt. If you look at this file, it says your choices configuration. You don't see the .mcf. So the real name of this file as it currently stands is yourchoices.txt, and then the extension that we can't see, which is another .txt. So it wouldn't be able to call the right one because we're listing the wrong file in our shortcut. So what we need to do is we need to remove this extra .txt. Now if you do click off it and it gives you a warning saying if you do this the extension will no longer be valid, you want to make sure you press no. This is just for Windows XP users and most Windows 2000 users. Let's go ahead and close this and start the shortcut again. Press next, I agree, and let's do a custom installation. These are all by default yes anyway, which we did specify to have them installed. Let's go ahead and press next, next. Now if you can notice here, my destination folder has changed, C drive Macro Express. If we press next again, the start menu folder has also changed to utilities. I've already installed Macro Express, so I'm just going to press cancel. The other option is that /s, and let's go ahead and plug that in now. I'm going to press apply and OK. If we go ahead and start the installation now, you won't see anything displayed visibly except for in the system bar where you'll see the install Macro Express 3 and it will tell you the percentage. Depending on if you've already installed Macro Express on this computer, you may or may not see the quick start guide or the macro editor once the installation is complete. The other factor to that would be if you specified in the key file not to display the editor or not to display the quick start guide. And this concludes the advanced installation. Thanks for watching.